Hello and welcome to our Safer Hardware webinar. We'll let everybody get settled in for about 30 seconds. We're excited. Think about your questions, jot them down. We'll put them in. So I only have to moderate one window. Would you please put them in the Q&A window if at all possible? If you have questions for our panel, we'd appreciate that. You grab your hot beverage or cool beverage. All right, we've already reached a third of our number of registrants, so let's go ahead and kick off. I'm Beth Elliott with Icon Agility. We're excited to have you all joining us today for our expert panel on safe and agility for hardware development. And we'll just do some quick housekeeping. As I requested, please direct your questions or comments to the Q&A window, and I will moderate those. But it's really more of a conversation between our experts here and hearing what you guys might have as hot topics on your plate within your own work environment. So I'll hand it off to John Miller.
Actually, I think Dwayne's going to kick us off. So.
Okay, great. Hey, Dwayne.
All right. Well, my name is Dwayne Bushman. Welcome, everyone. Glad you could join us. I am an SPCT, as it says on the slide there, a lean agile transformation coach. I've been working with scaling agility, kind of stumbled from Scrum and Kanban world of the onesie twosie teams into scaling in the 2012, 2013 timeframe. And since then, I've had the opportunity to work across all different environments, including software into firmware and hardware. So that's my credentials. John, you want to go next?
Sure. John Miller, another SPCT, working with Icon. Been working with Scaled Agile for about 9 years now, and for Icon about the same, maybe a little bit less. I spent my formative years in defense industry. Started as a system engineer. Did the system engineer, project manager. That whole path thing, risk management, get the program management training, and all that kind of stuff. Earn value. So much fun doing that kind of stuff. To get there, I actually have a background in physics, electrical, and computers. Did a side trip into business, so I've got my MBA. Got into the hardware side. I've been talking with Harry for years about hardware, and he's had this on the list of stuff to do for something like 6 years, if I remember right, when we first talked about it. I think it was 2018, Harry. Finally, we got the ability, the permission to do it. Anyway, from there, moved from being a defense contractor, I moved to a specialty system engineering contractor on the East Coast, worked with all the 3-letter agencies you've all worked with and for as we went through there. And now I'm doing safe both in companies and doing hardware and software stuff and mixing it up and working with Icon clients, getting a better flow of value and better decision-making data. And Harry, I'll give it to you.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, John. My name is Harry Kahneman. I grew up as a software person, but bumped into embedded software very quickly. Worked at Intel, did a lot of the embedded stuff. About 20 years ago or so, I also started in the defense space and got into the big system building, more system engineering. Then worked for an IBM business partner. We were an IBM Rational business partner, and IBM. That was a really fortunate event for me because that brought me in. We were their go-to partner in the engineering space, so ran into a lot of automotive, aerospace, defense, a lot of those types of companies, helped with their engineering practices, which Agile was a big mover back then. So we started helping people become more agile in those spaces. And of course, the systems they build aren't just all software. There's a lot of hardware to them. So if you want to do innovation, it's not just software innovation, it's also hardware innovation that has to participate as well. So spent the last 20 years or so in those industries, have a software bias, but worked a lot of the big system building space as well the last 20 years. And then 6 years ago, I was a partner of Scaled Agile, like John, Dwayne, and Beth here. But I joined the company about 6 years ago. And so I've been here at Scaled Agile, moved from the partner side to the company side. I've known John and Dwayne and Beth, for that matter, for probably a decade. I think we've known each other. Yeah, so real excited to be here and having a little chat with you guys. So it should be fun.
All right. So one of the first things you want to go on to the next slide, John, when we hear a lot this question here, why do hardware reliant solutions face unique challenges. And we're just going to kind of go through and have a conversation a little bit and seed this because there's a lot of different areas. And one of the first questions we often get asked is, well, either asked or, and sometimes the conversation goes to, well, you really can't do agility or even scaling agility for a hardware-based world. And that's something where obviously we've all challenged that over the many years. And there's a lot of different aspects. So Harry, I'll go to you first. When you hear somebody, ask about some of the challenges and the ability or maybe inability to do something in a cadence-based system, agility-based, what comes to your mind?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the people talk about the long lead times for hardware, right? We have to manufacture hardware. I can't make a new part every iteration or every sprint. But we have to, and that's true, right? So in software, in the last 20 years or so, we've a lot of infrastructure that's built into software where I can make a small change and I can get that into production. They talk about Netflix, we arrive at Netflix, you're going to put your code changes into production in your first week, right? And so with software does have the ability to deliver things more quickly than that. Hardware does have physical parts that they have to build. But it's really, there's two dimensions to it. One is we're not asking you to build a new part every iteration. We're asking you to, what did you learn every iteration? There's other ways we can learn. We can do things in, digital modeling, simulations. You can 3D print parts. There's digital technologies that are emerging and help us move faster. But also on the other side, I guess that's the real point, is that we want to investigate these digital technologies to learn faster. But we also want to be thinking less in terms of, a lot of the mindset in hardware is, well, I don't know what to build until you hand me a spec, right? I wait for, we have this big waterfall process that we follow. And we're also trying to break that down as well. We don't need to wait for a spec to start building. We start building, you give me a vision and a direction, and I start building and integrating with other folks.
Outstanding. So, John, along that lines, again, when we hear some of the unique challenges and the approaches that we want to take, if I were to come to you and say, hey, John, what problem am I going to fix by doing a safer hardware versus another approach, whether it be scaling agility or not? How would you respond to that?
I think one of the biggest things is from a product development perspective. And we're talking whether you use the word system or system of systems or large scale or ultra large scale. One of the things that comes up all the time is, how do we integrate? And we have this idea of integrating the smallest pieces and building them up into what we're actually going to deliver. And one of the things that I've seen happen in some companies, if they split a product development into software and hardware right off the top, they delay their integration. And by really figuring out their value streams and figuring out where those things that they're building, the components, the subsystems and everything, if they figure out where those exist, there's a chance that you will create a integrated product team, an agile team that truly is cross-functional. And some of that integration then gets pushed down much earlier in time. And as a result of that, we don't start with a hardware software split. We start with a true engineering idea of, hey, here's what we're building and here's how we need to integrate it. And then pulling on one of the threads that Harry just started is, now we can start working with folks to say, hey, I have an enabler, think of an enabler feature, and here's a question I need to answer, and here's a model we can use, a prototype or whatever else, and there's a million kinds of models. That's for a different discussion someday. But how can I use that to answer the questions to get to the point where we have a spec? And so now we start tying those things together from a integration perspective much earlier in time.
Yeah, and building on that, I would say the one other thing that stood out is we start to talk more about what is the intent, what is the solution that we're looking for, and we're not being prescriptive in that sense. So when I think about this question as well, on building on what both Harry and John said, one of those other unique challenges, and Harry kind of touched on it as well, is those roles and who's doing what. And you think about the number of people that are involved across the various areas. Not all roles are fungible. Not all roles are able to go in and just be that interchangeable Swiss Army knife. So what we have to do is be thinking about, the intent of what we're doing, getting it together, like John said. And he used another term when he said organizing around value. And that is one of the principles that we talk about, but it is really key because it allows us to think about how do we reduce dependencies? How do we reduce and by reducing dependencies and those integration points, those handoffs, we actually reduce our lead time. And that's one of the main areas that we think about, hardware reliant solutions facing unique challenges. And Harry led with, well, sometimes lead time is one of those things. Those dependencies are an area that are a huge opportunity for us, because if we can evaluate early using modeling, using simulations, using things that will allow us to learn, again, building on what Harry said, what are we learning in this iterative approach? That then helps us reduce those dependencies and actually move faster as well.
Yeah, I'm pulling what you said. When I think about intent, so often, especially in hardware, we used to do this in software. I argue, if I back up 25 years, we're kind of old. I waited for, give me a spec, then I'll write the system. If we think back on one of the examples we use is NASA, right back in the 60s, right? And I think I've worked on NASA programs, John probably has as well. It's a 6 or 7 year program to get a launch done, right? You're going to build a rocket and you do a launch. If we think back to the 60s, when President Kennedy challenged the country to go to the moon, we didn't specify the Apollo 13 rocket at that point to go to the moon, right? Instead, we had a bunch of incremental steps. There's Gemini programs and there were Mercury programs that went into orbit, and they did a bunch of learning. Right, so we need to be thinking, I think, in terms of much smaller steps. In fact, back then we went to orbit. I think there were 24 missions into space before Apollo 13, one every 3 or 4 months. So if we think about that, we were actually building integrated systems to go off and learn, because we didn't have the knowledge in 1962 to specify, design, and build the Apollo 13 rocket, lunar module, all the other components of that system, or the operational procedures to get people into space and bring them back home safely. We had to do incremental steps to learn, and we built, and the solution evolved over time. We had a solution to go into orbit, another solution to go to the moon, and the solution evolved based on that learning. So we really have to, I think, change our mindset in hardware to go just be able to move faster. And the cool thing is there's pressure now to do that. There's a SpaceX, there's Tesla, there's other car companies that are now innovating much more quickly in hardware industries, and that's putting pressure on the other companies, organizations in those industries to go be able to compete. But you're right, though. It starts with vision and intent. It doesn't start with a specification.
Along that line, we had a question. How do you help set those expectations of what Safe Agile can do in a hardware sense in terms of physically building things? Could one of you address that one?
And any of us can, but
Who wants to go first?
Well, from my seat, anytime I think about expectation settings, it's first understanding where we're at and what do we know about the topic and what don't we know about the topic. And the reason I say it that way is we've now been around with, lean's been around for decades, agility's been around for decades. Scaling is now, Harry just joked, we know each other for a decade. And you think about the scaling started it, right? So we're starting to get some long in the tooth in terms of having some really good experience of where we're going. And that means that we have some cognitive bias and understanding in terms of what we've heard and what we haven't heard. And I think when we start with that conversation, that expectation setting is, well, what have we heard? What do we understand it to be? And a little bit of both myth busting, but also reinforcement of what's there. Then taking that conversation and saying, now, realistically in our environment, what are we looking to achieve? What problems are we trying to solve? What are the outcomes that we would like to see? Because that way we're not framing it like saying, hey, I've got this solution here and it's going to be awesome, and all we got to do is apply it to any of your problems. What we start to do is say, no, what are we trying to solve? What are the areas that we have some pain points? What are the areas of opportunity? And then from there, if it is, hardware related, or we're having something in terms of, then we can start to look at, all right, now how do our principles apply? Because that's what you're going to hear some more in this conversation about, anchoring back to the principles and having, the mindset. Harry mentioned it earlier, changing our mindset on how we approach it in order to do things iteratively. That's how I would then start to frame it up, is first seek to understand the problem space. And then we start to say, now, how do we apply some of the techniques that we're going to be talking about here in the next 30 minutes? And I could go on. I'll let John and Harry, I don't want to just dominate.
One of the things I'll add, and this comes from, the background in defense, you think of all the work that gets to the point where somebody in that world has a spec or a product spec. And there's a whole lot of work, whether you call it a front end of the business, FEOTB, or you call it the fuzzy front end, lots of different words for that. But you've got to take a look at how we use Scaled Agile to do that. And we do that at the portfolio level. And that's where you start talking about that vision. Where are we going with this new solution? And if you think about an epic or a group of epics, think of that significant initiative that we talk about, that strategic theme in SAFe, how it drives, it's meant to drive anyway, a conversation that says, here's how we're going to create this new solution. And one of the things that we have to realize from a hardware perspective is we can't just jump into the middle. It starts way back in time. And when you're looking at the SAFe big picture, you got to look at how that idea is supposed to flow through the portfolio level and figure that out in your organization and say, here's the different functional areas or silos or COEs that are involved, or home shops, whatever you call them, to get to the point where we've got all the right folks involved, that collaboration. As a matter of fact, to me, a great image as a thought provoker, you go to the Epic owner article and scroll down a bit. It says, here's the folks the Epic owner needs to collaborate with. And it goes beyond that list to me, but it starts right there. So that's the front end stuff to me. And you start that vision at the portfolio level. Now you start carrying that through and you have consistency.
Yeah, great. The only thing I'll add is that the reason we use Agile in the first place is because we build innovative systems, right? If there's not a lot of innovation of thing that we're building, well, you can use a traditional approach and you can specify the thing, get it built, because there's not much risk, there's not much uncertainty. But when there is risk and uncertainty, like going to the moon, or many of the systems that we build, there's a lot of it. We're going to invent things. We haven't built this thing before. There's a lot of uncertainty in the thing we're about to build. The proven method to do that now is Agile. And it doesn't matter whether you're software, hardware, whatever it is, we need to take an incremental approach, build, integrate things, and get feedback on them. And that's just the best approach, whether it's a hardware thing, a software thing, and anything.
Excellent. Before we move off of this topic, I do see, and John, I'm going to tee this one up for you because I think it's right in a wheelhouse. Is Peter asked a question somewhere in the discussion, could you talk about the inclusion of model-based system engineering techniques?
Oh, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I've, the discussion with doing models and everything, I actually remember at Icon, we used to do this Tuesday night thing. We called them TNTs, when all the SPCs would get together and we talked about it. And I remember one from, bottom line, it was about 2018, but we started talking about all the different modeling techniques. And if you take a look at it, you've got all of these types of models, and the words that we use are critical, because prototype in certain people's worlds, that's the first one off the manufacturing line. That's really late. So what comes before that? If you've got the breadboards and brass boards and models to answer your question. I mean, think of the development of a car. It starts with a sketch, that's a model to answer certain questions. It moves to a clay-based thing that's to scale, like a 1/18th. And then you go to a full-blown, full-size car, clay-based, that once they get that, then they wrap it in stuff that makes it look like a car. These are all models to answer questions. But the thing that all of you have to figure out is, number one, what's the question we're trying to answer? And don't try to build a model to answer 3,000 questions. Build it to answer the question that's important to you. And if you can build on that model for the next one, it's even better. But now the question that's even more difficult is, how robust do we have to document all the stuff in this model? Is it a model we do on a whiteboard because we're all working together and that's enough? Or it's something that we have to get a whole lot more complex and we're using CAD/CAM and something to develop something. And it depends on the range of folks that you're communicating with and that are involved, and who has to see that information to move forward. So you've got to figure out a model that works for you to answer the question, and then the level of rigor that you want with that model, and then how do you communicate it? How do you capture it? All of those things will affect how long it takes you to use a model to answer the questions that you have to answer to get into a spec.
I love that. And I like when you said you, because you is the engineering practitioner. Because the question specific about model-based system engineering, MBSE, And so one thing I think I learned, John, when John, we had several of our community help us build this course over time. And one thing, and the course flow, we'll show you the flow in a minute. It began with specify incrementally, then come up with a plan, a schedule, a plan, a roadmap for it. And we reverse that, right? Because we start with a vision and a roadmap. The specifications evolve with the solution, right? So the people that are going to build those specifications are not system engineers sitting in an ivory tower that hand them off, right? As we build the solution, we're building the models and building the specs as we go, right? And that was one epiphany that I really got in the last few months working with the group, is that, SpaceX doesn't start with a specification when they're going to do the new Raptor engine. They start with a vision that says, hey, in 6 months, we need a new Raptor engine that's got more power because we're going to try to go to Mars. And that roadmap drives the test facility, the test stand people, the Raptor people, the launch pad people, everybody to go modify their parts of the solution, right? So it's really mode wrap. And while they're building that next Raptor engine, they're doing modeling, simulation, and building the engineering specifications along with the solution. So I think that was an epiphany. So I love when you said because you is the practitioners, the people building the system. It's not a handoff, which we see a
I'd
lot.
like to pull one other thread that you said there, Harry, that before we close on this topic and move into the client experiences conversation or portion of the conversation, you talked about testing. You just kind of mentioned saying, this approach then allows for, and that's a very common question that we get asked is, well, what about testing? How do you do that? What's the approach? And, when you think about our ability to start to look and shift things left, we hear that we're saying, and that just means, test it early and often to retire risk, to prove a hypothesis. And we think about, things like hardware in the loop that allows us to go through and work with that component, but then use our technology, our digital twins, our other things that allow us to go through and prove or disprove a hypothesis. So as Harry, so eloquently stated, when we start to think about the whole and the intent and things emerge iteratively, it's all aspects need to and testing is just as important. It's not left at the end. It's because if we don't do it up front, what we're going to end up doing is having this big event, this big aha moment that might or might not go well. What we want to do is take it and make it non-moments, right? Because we're testing throughout the process, proving the hypothesis, learning from it, and then going forward. John, Harry, anything you want to add on to that as well?
Yeah, just that I agree. And you mentioned like hardware in the loop environments and the test stands and the things. We need to build those earlier, right? So we're not going to test at the end. To your point, we're going to start with testing. So and that was a great example from Tesla. When Tesla said we're going to do the Raptor engine, they also were building the test stand at the same time, right? So those things get built together. We don't say, hey, we're going to do an engine and then 2 years from now we're going to be testing it. We're going to be testing it while we're building the engine. Another thing that comes up too is since we're testing more frequently, we need more test environments, right?
Yes.
Otherwise, test environments become a bottleneck. In fact, if you see I'm going to pick on Tesla or SpaceX again because they saw I've read a bunch of videos recently about them the last week or so. But in their test stand environment, they actually have 4 test stands for the Raptor engine. They don't build 1, they build 4, right? It's these big concrete platforms to go test those Raptor engines. So they didn't just build 1 stand, they built 4. Because they wanted they don't want the throughput of the testing to be a bottleneck in innovation.
John, anything you care to add on that before I think we can.
So much, but I can hold. I'm good.
Yeah.
All right.
We could talk for an hour on any one of these questions. They're just too fun.
That's right.
All right. So in the interest of time, I think we should move to the client experiences.
And this really gets into, and bottom line, all the stuff that Harry's been talking about SpaceX, and we've got all 3 of us have lots of experience with different companies. And Harry, you've been talking about it, but what else would you add with the folks that you're working with today?
Yeah, so so this is one of the slides from the course, right? To say that this type of innovation is already happening, right? So I've done a lot of work in automotive. When I did some work back at General Motors. We use them as the example a second, but if I have a better part design, maybe I have a heat pump that draws less power, or a heat pump that's cheaper to manufacture. In most organizations, well, that's going to be in the next model year, or maybe the next vehicle redesign, right? A year or 3 years from now, we're going to get that value, that innovation. Tesla says, well, that should be the next car off the manufacturing line. Why are we going to delay the cost of delay of getting that innovation into the car, right? We're not getting the value, right? So looking at the full value stream, same with SpaceX, right? We talked earlier that they launch in terms of weeks or months, not in terms of years, as we think about in NASA today. But it's not just the startups, right? I love this General Motors story, right? General Motors got the Hummer EV out the door in 2 years. Normal time for a brand new innovation of a concept car is 5 to 6 years for most automotive companies, General Motors included. They got the Hummer EV out in 2 years because the CEO challenged them to do that. Public stories, you can go read about it. And they credit the fact they had already made an investment in digital modeling, right? So they already had a model-based engineering, a digital engineering group. And the Hummer EV said, we're going to be one of your customers. Get in here and bring that digital engineering investment, and we're going to leverage it. And that was one of the big reasons they were to get out in 2 years. I think they said they only did one vehicle prototype, and they did it 12 months or 9 months before manufacturing, because they did all their learning in a digital environment, more rapid learning. Boeing's another example. You read about the Red Hawk. They went from concept to first flight test in 36 months, which is extremely fast for, so we're seeing a lot of that, as Dwayne pointed out, shifting left, right? If we're going to shift the release dates of things left, then we've got to shift everything left, the development, engineering, testing, etc. And it's not just the unicorn startups. We're seeing this in old, staunchy, 100-year-old aerospace and automotive companies, which is very cool. We like to cite those. If you have more stories like that at your organization, send them to us, because we like citing this, the innovation that's happening out there, and not just the Tesla and SpaceX of the world.
But it does take a different mindset. And as you're taking a look at this, and Harry, I know you're doing a bunch of stuff with Tesla, but one of the things that, in of course, the last however many months working on the Safer Hardware course, we learned that Tesla has a digital twin for every single car they build. Is that true?
Yeah, I think there was something like that, right? That well, since every car can be unique, right? Then their PLM, their product line system, right? What happens if I have a defect in a car? That has to be able to be traced back to the manufacturing. So since every car can be unique, they have to certify every car specifically too. So there's a lot of digital infrastructure that they have created at Tesla. In fact, the data that they capture on these cars, it's custom, it's unique, right? Because of that, because every car can be different, every part can be different on a car, and for product line management, the PLM stuff, we have to be able to track all that stuff. So they have very robust digital engineering. They also have to test every car. Every car is run through. Every car, since it can be unique, is run through all the tests, right? We don't just inspect, grab one off the line and inspect it. We test every car that comes off the line in Tesla. It's run through every non-destructive test, because it has to be. And so they've automated all these tests, right, to build. That's part of building quality in. If we're going to have a lot of variability, we've got to build a lot of quality in.
So using that example, Harry, in terms of every car and going through running every test, we've got a unique digital twin and the pairing. Troy asked a question that I think fits nicely here as well. How do requirements engineering fit into this approach? So how do we understand and track and go from that fixed to or variable to fixed approach in our solution intent?
Well, but haven't you heard, with Agile, we don't have to do requirements anymore.
There's
We're Agile.
We'll tell you when we tell you.
Yeah. Well, we talk about that in the course to some degree too, that we still need requirements, right? That car coming off the line still has to go through NTSB. I need a functional specification. I need tests that demonstrate that functional specification, and I've got to go through regulatory compliance. The difference is that, the way we communicated to teams in the past was all through requirements. So everybody's probably familiar with the detailed requirements specs. You got, system requirements and subsystem requirements and component requirements in nausea. Well, we have another place for requirements, and that's called backlogs, right? So certainly we need our system requirements and specs up here to capture that. But a lot of the communication now is not going to be in requirements documents. It's in backlogs, right? So we can wipe out a bunch of that traditional requirements activities. And then if we think about building the spec, and we don't need a requirement specification up front of the requirements that we do need, we just need them at the end for verification. So we start with a vision and intent, a roadmap, and a lot of questions to be answered. And over time, as the teams do the learning, right, the requirements grow. The requirement spec grows along with the system. So we don't start out with a requirement spec. We start with a lot of questions, and we end with an operational solution with a full requirement spec we build them together.
Excellent. John, anything to add on that?
Oh, absolutely. And just like everything else, this is a long discussion on its own. And so, one of the things that we should toss out is if you have more questions after this, reach out to Beth and, we'll figure that out. But one of the things that we learned a while ago now is when you're using your models and you're trying to move something from that variable space, in other words, it's still a TBD or maybe a TBR into a fixed number, and you look at the safe thing for that variable versus fixed, and it's got that, upward sloping line. Well, to me, what that says is, look, you probably have a floor or a ceiling that, your number that you want to be at least at, but you're trying to figure out a right number. And to me, it's kind of like a TBR in the old world. And you're saying, hey, we're trying to figure out the best solution for this. And now we get into trade space. And, if you think of the solution space or the trade space from a system engineering perspective, and you're figuring out, based on all the other constraints we've got, where are we going to end up? But now when we move into lean product development using SAFe, there's another constraint I'm going to propose to all of you, and it's in the model. We talk about it, but I'm not sure everybody's using it to the best extent possible. And that's your internal decision-making framework. And part of that, and you got to dig into, the stuff and what leads into that. But part of that decision-making framework is you have some ideas, some models, decision-making models that says, here's our trade-off that we want to work within, not only from an engineering perspective, but from a cost perspective. And I remember a story, it actually came out of Boeing, and one of the fellows that was working with us, I think that's where I heard it, but to develop the course, I think it was Debbie. The thought that came across was they had a decision-making model that said, look, at every team level, they had a ability to make decisions, not only from an engineering perspective, but when you're designing a plane, weight is really important. And they had a certain amount that they could spend for this weight cost trade-off because it changed the product development model. And they figured that out ahead of time, and that got communicated to the folks to make engineering decisions. And it makes a difference. But now we're tying this to a totally different thing, this decision-making framework, which is models again, but it's from the economic side, not an engineering side. And all of a sudden, we've got to figure out, for this part, if we've got something we're creating a spec for, do I spend this much money to get this much benefit, which is nothing, or are there places where I can spend almost no money, get huge benefit? And that's this idea of using models to answer your questions, to move the number of your spec from where it might be into where it needs to be, the fixed perspective. And so to me, that's a big thing, and using enablers and models to do that is huge.
Yep.
Kimberly asks a good question here in terms of what ways can a SAFe Agilist build in the appropriate culture mindset to design incrementally in traditionally waterfall organizations. And I'll go first out of the gates on this one, guys, in terms of, because Kimberly, I've actually lived this as well in terms of that traditional waterfall model. And one of the overused statements out there is meet people where they're at, right? And what I'll often say is, but don't leave them there. So how do we as Agilists start to go through and do that? And you think about, well, we believe in certain core values and we believe in certain things that we want to go through. And Harry said it at the onset, and I think John did as well, our mindset and how we kind of reframe it and reframe the thinking. So I once had an individual say to me, Dwayne, we can't do this because, it's going to take us 6 months to create that physical thing. So we can't do this iteratively, and because and I said, you know what, you're right. On Monday morning, when we come in to kick this off, you're just going to stare at your screen paralyzed because you don't know what to do next. And, well, no, I absolutely know what to do next. Well, okay. So now let's have that. Now, what can we learn? What can we integrate? How would we retire risk from this? John said it before. What's that most important thing that I want to find out in the next 2 weeks, 2 months, whatever that time frame is? So as an Agilist, what I'm starting to do is reframe the conversation, not from what we can't do, but how do we apply these practices and principles that they're based on in order to go through. Maybe we're not Tesla and we don't have a digital twin for every car. And maybe we're starting this for the first time. perhaps it's just, hey, who all needs to be in the room? Do we have everyone represented that might have a really good perspective that might either increase the delivery or maybe even derail it, right? You start to apply the things that we've learned through, Leading Safe and other courses that you've taken to apply that lean and agile mindset. And then we start bringing them along the way in terms of what that environment looks like.
The only thing I'll add is that you usually, we've all done this as consultants, usually find some kind of internal open-minded person that you can convince, or what's probably convince is the wrong word, but you can sway and they become your champion. A lot of times it's hard for us to become a champion because I'm not in there, and I'm not a system engineer, I'm not an electromechanical engineer. But if you can find somebody in that community that then becomes your advocate, right? And you work with one or two of those people, and they're seen as leaders, or they're looked up to in that community. That's usually what I found the best way to go is I can try to persuade a whole group, but it's easier if I tip somebody internally, and then they become the persuader, if you will.
Yeah, excellent add-on.
Should we go forward, Dwayne?
Yes, please.
So I know I put this in here because it is in the news and it's kind of interesting. This just goes exactly what you were saying, Harry. The Rivian prototype for VW took 3 months. That's
Right.
huge.
Yeah.
I don't want to say on this, but for everybody here, this kind of stuff is in the news all the time. And look at Rivian's coming out of that different world. This is that startup mode. So there's stuff in the news. And if you want more in the news, let us know. There's lots of examples. So moving forward, why use safer hardware? And it's, again, we're just trying to figure out what kind of questions did you have? By the way, for all of you. So when Beth sent out that notice of questions, we got 47 questions back from you. We're just trying to go down that path and kind of filter some of the highlighted ones, so to speak, to say which are ones that we thought you might be interested in from a discussion perspective. So numerous folks reached out to Dwayne and Harry and I and sent us questions that they had. And these are the folks that are the senior leadership team type folks, letting us know what they're thinking of. And so some of these questions came from them. And so Dwayne, who do you think target audience is for this class for safer hardware?
Yeah, so before I answer that, let's back up just for a moment. Leading Safe has been a flagship course for Scale Agility since day one. And we've all taught it, and many of you have probably sat through it, maybe more than once, especially if you went on for implementing to become an SBC, where we teach it again from another direction. And having that as our foundation, it became apparent that, for things like hardware, we needed that plus. And that then also brought the challenge, because there's so much, anyone that's taken these courses, there's so much content that you say you've got 2 days to deliver it, and now we're going to add more. So the need to then cater a course to safer hardware kind of grew out of that, to say, okay, that was wonderful. We'd had many a hardware engineer sit in those seats, and their appetite was whet, but not quite satisfied. So in going through here and saying, okay, now this is what we're looking at in terms of how to go through, it's that organization that is producing physical product. It is that organization that's concerned about the questions that we talked about. Like, our roles aren't fungible. We can't just spin up a cross-functional agile team that contains, an industrial engineer, a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer, right? It doesn't work that way. So this course is intended to address the foundational principles, right, that we're building everything on, but then also, how does it then go through and be applied in a hardware arena? And that's where the target audience starts to come in. And Harry, I'm going to toss over to you because I know you've got a lot more content in terms of the background.
Yeah, so you hit nail on the head, right? In fact, when we started developing the safer hardware course, our hypothesis was we're going to take Leading Safe and maybe adjust 30% of it. And then we started meeting with John and everybody working on an outline. And then, well, that's not it, right? That doesn't even come close to meeting the goal. So it is a new course. It is targeting the same kind of individuals, though. People the leaders in those organizations. It might be a manager, people who manage hardware folks. people who lead the value streams that are building either large systems or the components, physical components of those larger systems. Project managers as well, like in government. So anybody that's involved with the direction and vision of these large programs. That's the target audience. I see you have large solution. It's not a large solution course. It's funny because when we think about these cyber physical, these hardware systems we build, a lot of the large solution concerns come in as well. But we've got a bunch of coordination between these, many value streams have to coordinate and align roadmaps, and we have a little bit of that in there, but we had to pull a lot of it out because it was going to be way more than 2 days. So we have that content. We've had those ideas that the community was contributing, but that's probably for another offering. It's not specifically for this offering, and it makes sense because we want to be able to deliver this course not just to people building, SATCOM systems and automotives, but you might be building a small medical device, right? So you may have a handful of teams or a single art building a solution or a product. So a lot of those kind of conversations might not have made sense.
And I'll just add one point about how this is different. I've had this almost every time we teach almost any course. Why are we going through all the principles again? Because we got that there. In this class, I think we spend, what is it, Harry, about an hour on the principles versus, the 3 or 4 hours in leading.
Yeah. And what we did is a lot of the principles, instead of like talking about, preserve options, we didn't talk about that as a principle section. We talked about it. We talked about specifications. Right. So we brought a lot of those principles into the actual course itself. And we call out the principles when we talk about it in context. We didn't talk about the principles separate from the material. We talked about the principles when we talked about the material. If you're doing incremental specifications, you are preserving your options, as an example.
I'm going to pivot slightly here, guys, in terms of also the target audience and go through. Steve asked an interesting question in terms of, and I'll boil it down in terms of how do you manage various suppliers and contractors, especially when you have a traditional contracting bidding approach and going through. What is some guidance that accounts for the hybrid situation where we're moving through an agility, but we also have a very large partnership with our suppliers in that sense. And this is one of those things where we absolutely have to have awareness and visibility of who all the players are. So clearly, the more different types of contracts, the more different types of suppliers that we have in our ecosystem, the complexity is that much greater. And this is where when we start talking about, and the reason when I say I'm going to pivot, it's like, why choose safer hardware? This is actually in one of the lessons where we start going through and saying, hey, what about vendor management? And how does that look when we look at this managing our investments? And I'm going to tie this in a bit to the iterative approach and the cadence-based, where we start to go through and say, yeah, we need that long-term relationship. We want that long-term relationship, but we have to understand what those integration points are, when they're occurring on our cadence, and what does that mean going back to the very first comments that Harry made about specifications and requirements, saying, what roadmaps are we looking at? What is the intent on where we're at? And then using our relationship with our suppliers and our vendors, our contractors, to help us achieve those milestones in a cadence-based approach. So going back to, what do we need to learn? What risks do we need to retire? When do we need it from? Think of it like any other art or any other team that we have a dependency with to make sure that we've got information flowing. Then we use our cadence to renew and revisit these things to make sure how are we doing as we progress down that line. And the first thing is it's all about that visibility of who's playing in the game and what do we need from each so that we can understand the various relationships and where they come in and when they come in.
And I think you just brought up another target audience, right? So another target audience is our suppliers, right? If we're going to work in a different way than we have in the past and probably contract with you in a different way, you should understand that way of working. And and we've all taught leading safe before with groups of people, right? It's great to get everybody in the room, the OEM, the prime, if you will, and the subcontractors, and all of a conversation about this new way of working. Right, we've all used leading for that, and that's another purpose of the safer hardware. To get everybody in the room and say, new way of working. This is the way we're going to collaborate.
you know, we do say new way of working, but I got to admit, and this has been going on since got into SAFe, which was in 2013. We've been using the model from Toyota to teach this. It's like, look, from a lean product development perspective, you reach out to your suppliers, you create long-term relationships. Over time, as their current statement of work expires, you get legal involved supply chain and everybody else to write a contract that's more flow-based. And as a result of that, you start getting tighter knit relationships with those folks that are your long-term suppliers. But to me, it's not new. It's been around forever in lean product development. So we're revisiting it. We're pulling it to the forefront again, but it's not new.
Oh, John, we polished and shined it all up. It's a shiny new thing. Come on.
Everything old is new again. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
Okay. Before we transition from here, Troy did ask a quick follow-on question to the companies that are using it: Tesla, SpaceX, GM. Harry, what's the penetration or use with SAFe in these organizations?
so, I mean, I don't talk about our customers, right? Some of I've worked with some of those customers for sure. Some are and some aren't. You can read about our customers that are publicly facing on our customer stories. But we bring those up just as examples of organizations that are applying lean agile practices, not necessarily SAFe, right? And some are, some aren't, but that's the goal, is to talk about the success and outcomes, right? The organizations are striving to deliver faster, learn faster, and be more innovative.
Excellent, thank you. And one other one, Harry, that I'm going to direct to you as well is in terms of the implementation roadmap and where SAFe for hardware, excuse me, where does it show up on the implementation roadmap? Is it showing up, and what's that look like from an SAI perspective?
Yeah, we haven't updated. This is not GA yet, right? We have some of our partners like Icon are doing a limited release offerings of the course, which is great. When it goes GA, sometime early next year, it's the equivalent to leading. So wherever you see leading SAFe on the implementation roadmap, that's the equivalent place for this. It's kind of like leading for these different types of organizations.
So it's in lieu of leading SAFe, not in addition to, is what the intent is. If I was looking to say, what classes should I have people go through, I might lean more based on the audience we just described to SAFe for hardware.
Now, what is cool about the course is, as you both pointed out, I think there's probably 7 or 8 slide overlap with leading. So if you have an organization that has already taken leading SAFe, you could bring some of those folks back in to have more conversations about SAFe for hardware. Right, it is a different course. It's not a leading for hardware. It's a different course with different content and completely different material.
Yeah, and one pro tip I'll add on that is sequencing and duration, time between classes is also very important. Don't rapid fire any classes, folks, because when you do that, people need time to digest and learn and maybe apply it in their context, because when you come back for that, let's say you did have leading SAFe and it was 6 months ago, and now you're wondering about when's the right timing. People are going to come better prepared with better questions and better understanding as they have some time to digest and apply it in their environment and before they take that next class. So there's no prescriptive time, a week, a month, but just think about that you don't run them back to back because you want to get them done in terms of the learning. Personal opinion, sorry.
So yeah, and the what learners will gain. So if you think about leading SAFe, it's kind of for leaders, and it focuses on, if you're a SAFe person, the competencies of team and technical agility, where we talk about arts and PI planning, and then it goes off to the portfolio. And if SAFe for hardware more focuses on the kind of the enterprise solution delivery, ESD practice about specifications and roadmaps, kind of bigger. If you think about leading SAFe, it kind of looks within the PI. We do PI planning and talk about how to execute the PI. We also do that in SAFe for hardware, but it literally is like 6 slides. We look beyond the PI, right? Because we're thinking these hardware systems usually have longer roadmaps, longer visions, longer directions. So the course really focuses on kind of outside the PI, not inside the PI. So there we need more milestones. We need more synchronization, coordination across value streams. We do talk about that. We talk about enablers. John had a big section on NFRs, right? John was instrumental in as I talked specifically about NFRs. So a lot of the concerns that are relevant to hardware that we don't talk about in leading, we talk about those concepts in the Safer Hardware course.
And the one thing I'll add, and it goes down the path that the thread you were pulling on, Harry, is that synchronization. Because we talk about teams being synchronized at the art level, but then it's like we forget about that word. And I got to admit, and I always got to bring in at least one book reference, but if you go to Reinertsen and you start reading about synchronization, you start realizing it's a whole lot bigger in SAFE than just teams. Think of the product and synchronization about the product. If we have multiple arts working on the same solution, whether it's a system, a system service, whatever it is in your environment, those different arts need to be synchronized. That's, a solution train or a value stream, depending on how you look at it. But how big does it get? And I know if any of you have a question on how big does it get, go read Boeing's case study. They have super trains. They have something like 3,500 folks that are all synchronized. All their arts are firing off on the same day at the same point in time. And it's not to fire them off at the same point in time. It's so when you get to the end and you're integrating at the same point in time. So keep that in mind as you're considering this synchronization. To me, that's a big deal that a lot of folks forget. And I've worked with organizations that had dozens of arts and they were all over the place and they could never integrate.
All right. Next slide, I believe, in the interest of time, I think we could talk for many hours here, folks. If that's not obvious.
There will be peace and harmony within your organization, and you will have massive profits. And just take Safer Hardware. That's where there's benefits. Kidding. Yeah.
So when I think about the organizational benefits, I'll give Harry a break here and jump in. The what questions to ask. I always think about leading Safer Hardware in terms of it's a baselining conversational course, because this is the beginning. We talk about go safe or go scaling and start to, all right, now that we've baselined, now we start to understand, we can develop those heat maps of areas to go through. So an organizational benefit is we all start singing from the same hymnal. We all start understanding what it is that we're saying and doing together, so we can develop the plan to move forward. So on things like, John just sharing, what are those integration points? Is our solution aligned with the arts that are developing, and we have true solution trains? This helps us in that broader sense, especially as we start thinking about, again, don't forget about the suppliers and our integration partners, right? That gives us those other areas that gets us into things like, well, what does transparency mean in these longer lead times? It's fine that we're talking about a PI, but what about when we have to look out the 6, 12, 18 months because of the time frame that we're working within? What does that look like? These are all, tremendous benefits to walking through a course like this.
I need to add one that's not on this list, because I was working with somebody just last week about metrics. And we talk about metrics, that the flow metrics that we've got in SAFE, you look at that measure and flow article, there's that list of 6+% CCA. So there's really 7. But when you get into lean product development, you're thinking of that, what are those metrics coming out? And they're the same flow metrics. They have their heritage in lean, and we're talking the same kinds of things. And if you start measuring cycle time across these things and you start presenting a consistent picture to senior management, it starts getting really valuable. You start seeing how long stuff really takes and how much it weights. And remember, Reinertsen says, if you're going to measure one thing, measure the cost of delay.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest benefit is it's like leading. We've all probably, everybody on this call has been around for a while. We've taught leading, and it's really about changing the mindset. Dwayne mentioned mindset multiple times throughout this last hour, and that's what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to tip leaders to say we're gonna work in a different way, and we have to change our mindset in order to have permission and change that way we're working. And so this is that tipping class, if you will, for these types of companies.
Dwayne, do you have any more questions to coming from the folks, or should we hand this back to Beth for
I
closeout?
think in the interest of time, we have about 5 minutes here. Beth, if
Yeah.
you'd like to take us home with a little bit about ICON and next steps.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This has been really helpful, I think, for everybody, and thanks for all the questions. Yeah, we're a platinum partner. We're a very small boutique firm. We're very client-centric. So we would love to work with you. I think I mentioned a couple times in the chat that we have that training coming up. It's a public virtual class with John Miller teaching it on January 28th and 29th. So you could hit that URL or just hit iconagility.com. And then we have the folks available for coaching. So let us know and we can do short or long-term or medium-term coaching to help you out. So stay in contact with us. And if there are any other questions, go ahead and pop them in the Q&A window. But other than that, I think that we could wrap up a couple minutes early if there aren't any other closing remarks.
I think everybody should have a closing remark. Let's say Harry for last. Dwayne, what do you want to go for?
Oh, I love that, John. Thank you. I'm unprepared. No, I having now gone through this courseware and the conversations and just, it really gets you thinking about an approach that you can take. And I know Harry just mentioned it again. I'm a bit of a dog with a bone when we start talking about the mindset. It's so important, and this allows us to explore those avenues. So I like the course. I think it's well set up. The fact that it's going GA, I look forward to the iterative offerings based on the feedback that we get from all the attendees that are going to be taking this in short order.
And I'll add to what Dwayne just said and add this. So you're already thinking flow in software. Now we're talking flow in hardware, but it's always been there. As a matter of fact, one of the comments, and Harry and I had a discussion on this probably a month, 6 weeks ago. There's so many folks, and hopefully you're not one of these, but a lot of the stuff in Agile came out of Lean. And so now think about this. You take a software person that's doing safe for software, and we've already translated from Lean into software, and then they're trying to translate back into hardware. And we lose stuff in the translation. And the conversation that I remember Harry and I having, and maybe it wasn't that long, Harry, maybe it hangs out more in my mind than yours, but it was like, look, we want to go straight from the Lean principles into hardware so we don't lose stuff in translation. And that's one of the things I'll leave folks with, that mindset is we're not translating back through software to get to hardware. We're translating from hardware back immediate to Lean. And there's all those really great practices for Lean product development and hardware. And there's a bunch of practices. It's not just the 4 or 5 that we list on the SAFe site. So there's a lot of hardware practices that deal with flow. Harry alluded to some of them, those developing test beds at the same time, but there's a lot more. So there's a lot that this class will trigger in your minds. And Harry, I'll hand off to you.
Yeah, so my closing comment, I'll answer the questions in chat too. There is a certification. It's really a quiz now. It's a quiz, not an exam, 20-question quiz, and you can take it as many times once you pass it. So it's really a quiz for leaders to just kind of get through it. And there is a certification. I think it's HW hardware, but don't quote me on that. I forget what it is, but there is a certification. The last thing I'll say is that this has been a long time coming. As John and Dwayne mentioned, we were talking about this several years ago, and I've just been really excited, encouraged by all the participants we got. John and several others helped us build this course. They were on calls. We were having weekly calls every Tuesday, and that wasn't enough. We moved into Tuesday, Thursday, right? As we came closer to the alpha delivery, we're meeting twice a week, right? So it's like fast feedback. And I really appreciate all the energy from the community, people like John and Icon for helping us build this class, and we hope that it hits the mark. And it's gotten a lot of feedback. We think it's really promising, and we had a group of, I don't know, 6 or 7 regulars and up to 10 or 12 people at a time help contribute to the course. So we're excited about it. Of course, we're going to put it in GA, and we're in limited release now. We're going to get more feedback, and we'll get more feedback as it goes GA. So we're going to continue to evolve it as well. We also are going to, this is the first of probably a series of offerings in the hardware space. You probably need more. You need more than this, right? You need maybe some enablement for SPCs. You need some workshops, maybe a Teams course as well. So we have a backlog of items back at Scaled Agile that we're going to be working on going forward as well. So excited about the future of the next year or so around hardware.
Awesome.
Beth, it's all yours.
It's all mine. You're all welcome to go forth and design hardware using agile techniques. Thank you all. We appreciate it. And this
Thanks,
will be
everybody.
posted for anybody who couldn't attend. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.